Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Pardon my voice, I'm recovering from a bad throat infection. For this year's Halloween, I wanted to do this spooky video listing my top 10 favorite horror films of all time. These are the horror films that I believe are the best and most masterful at scaring the audience right down to the bone. Hope you all enjoy it. Coming up first at number 10 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This film is a spectacular display of haunting imagery that will be glued to your mind long after it's over. From the masks made out of human leather, the bedrooms made out of bones, the cannibalistic dinner table scene, etc. All of it does a great job making the audience shiver down their spine. This film knows exactly what to deliver to its audience through its subtle implications with its dialogue and visuals. In my opinion, this film had no reason to be a franchise and should have just ended after the first entry. And up next at number 9 is Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. In my opinion, this is the best entry in the Friday the 13th franchise. Not only is it my favorite Friday the 13th film, but also a slasher film classic if you ask me. In my opinion, it has the most memorable characters and kills in the franchise, from Doug to Sarah to the comedian Ted and the awkward kid Jimmy played by Crispin Glover. None of the other characters from the other Friday the 13th films even hold a candle to these guys. The chemistry they all have is fantastic, and you truly buy that they are all companions. This is the film where I believe that Jason was at his scariest the most, and you truly bought how much of an unstoppable killing machine he really was. The kills and suspense are all creative and scary, and they gave you a great sense as to how Jason is a force to be reckoned with. The atmosphere and rainy weather aesthetic even helps bring out the deaths and carnage caused by Jason's rampage. Overall, Friday the 13th Part 4 is, until this day, my favorite film in the series, and although I wish it stopped here, we all know that Hollywood is too greedy for that. Coming up next, at number 8, is The Exorcist Part 3. Okay, hot take time. This film is the best Exorcist film in the series, and where the franchise reached its peak. There was no David Gordon Green directed Legacy sequel that was released last year. That never happened, and that was a dark age. George C. Scott's performance as Kinderman was great, and to see him go on a pursuit to uncover the horrifying mystery surrounding the Gemini murders was a great journey. The chemistry he even has with Ed Flanders was really good too. But by far, the best acting in this film is unquestionably Brad Dourif's performance as the Gemini killer. Every single time he was on screen, he truly gave a horrifying performance that will send shivers down the audience's spine. His performance was so goddamn good, I would pay good money to see a whole film with just him as the Gemini killer alone. The directing of this film is also superb, and it oozes with scary atmosphere, demonic imagery, and haunting themes that will stick in your mind after the end. It was a very well-made murder mystery with psychological horror elements that blends together very skillfully. No other Exorcist film in the franchise even comes close. Not even the original. Sorry. Up next, at number 7, is Scream. This was a brilliant meta-commentary on the horror genre that adds to the brilliance of this slasher classic. Scream is one of the most iconic and remarkably well-done self-aware horror films that, in my view, saved the horror genre in the 90s. The fact that this film managed to blend horror and parody in such a subtle way is so outstanding and impressive. Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott is one of the greatest horror heroines in horror film history, right up there with Ellen Ripley and Laurie Strode. Oh yeah, I said it. To see her develop from being a traumatized teen who lost her mother to a strong independent lead taking out the killers was a great developmental journey. Now, is this film my favorite horror film by Wes Craven? Nah, that honor goes to number 2 on this list. But it still doesn't take away my belief that this is truly an iconic horror gem that should be getting more praise for being such a great horror parody. Coming up next, at number 6, is Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock truly left a great mark on cinema with this masterfully suspenseful magnum opus. This film introduced us to Norman Bates, who is one of the most iconic and recognizable horror villains in history. What makes Norman so great is how unassuming he is. He's just a weird, socially awkward loner who looks like the kind of guy who wouldn't even hurt a fly. But underneath all that facade is a truly psychotic madman with bad mommy issues. To say that Alfred Hitchcock is the master of suspense would be putting it lightly, because the way he builds it in this film leaves the audience constantly wondering what will happen next, who is gonna die, how are they gonna die, etc. The atmosphere, set designs, and imagery even help add to that. Most of the deaths in this film happen off-screen, and that's what makes it effective because it's our imagination that fills in the gaps. It's not the violence that's scary in a horror film, it's how it's suggested in our minds. I am so grateful that this film was such a massive hit, because without it, the horror film genre would be nowhere where it is today. Up next, at number 5, is John Carpenter's Halloween. It's a miracle that an independently funded horror film such as this managed to be so masterful in its execution. This film introduced us to Michael Myers, one of the most iconic horror villains of all time. His presence is constantly felt throughout the film in such a haunting manner that you truly believe that he is the boogeyman. Only for him to be bastardized in the later sequels, but that isn't really this film's fault, to be fair. You can tell the Hitchcockian motifs and elements that inspired the making of this film. One of the things about it that I believe works so well and how scary it is the fact that it's very realistic. It happens in a normal setting, thus making the characters more familiar and relatable to the audience. It isn't some supernatural entity, it's a psycho killer in a mask that just snaps and starts murdering people. The only downside I have to say is that the 70s dialogue from the teenage characters is a little dated, but I'm willing to shrug it off because this film still does a superb job at making them fun and engaging to the point where you don't really want to see them die. So yeah, Halloween, even after 50 years, is still a horror film masterpiece, and is a film that all aspiring horror directors should look towards for inspiration on how to make a realistic and scary horror film. Coming up next, at number 4, is Dario Argento's Suspiria. This foreign horror film masterpiece is so well renowned for its use of Technicolor imagery to convey its beautifully haunting visuals. Everything about this film just works so well, and how scary and beautifully disturbing it is, from the musical score to the directing, the insane visuals, etc., all of which together work to create such horrifying imagery that still sticks with you after the credits roll. You can tell watching this film how skilled Dario Argento was in crafting this film to be a truly unforgettable and mysterious thrill ride. This film forces its audience to go through the descent of madness that the main character goes through when uncovering secrets of her prestigious ballet school. If you haven't seen this film, then you are doing yourself a great disservice. Overall, Suspiria has still aged remarkably well after all these years. Moving along to number 3 is John Carpenter's The Thing. In my opinion, this is John Carpenter's greatest work of horror in the sense that it is such a mysterious thrill ride with the audience constantly glued to their seat, wondering who is the imposter alien and who isn't. The puppet work, animatronics, and sci-fi horror imagery still until this day has not aged poorly. You can tell Carpenter put his heart and soul into making this film with how gorgeously terrifying the monsters looked and interacted. The amazing use of editing and timing with the shots helps build suspense and tension to the audience, not knowing when the thing is gonna pop out, where it's gonna be, and who is it impersonating. I am so saddened to know that it flopped at the box office and didn't do commercially well, because it was so masterfully made that it warranted a better response during its release. Overall, The Thing until this day, in my opinion, is John Carpenter's greatest horror achievement. And up next, at number 2, is A Nightmare on Elm Street. You know that a horror film about nightmares was effective when it didn't make you sleep well at night. This film introduces us to Freddy Krueger, who, in my opinion, is the scariest horror villain of all time. To know that you're not even safe from this guy when you're sleeping is just terrifying. Robert Englund proved alone with this film why nobody will ever replace him as Freddy Krueger, with his charming but scary personality that will haunt your dreams. Pun intended. Everything about this film just worked masterfully, from the haunting musical score, to the scary visuals in the dream world, to the composition and the editing of the shots, and so on, all of which work together to create a film that will scare you enough to not even sleep well knowing Freddy might come for you in your dreams. The scene at the boiler room at Nancy's high school is enough to give anyone nightmares. The fact that this film took something as comforting as sleep and made it seem like a terrifying thing to do speaks volumes to how effective it is as a horror flick. Wes Craven, may he rest in peace, was at his peak in the making of this film, if you ask me. And finally, At number 1, my favorite horror film of all time is Alien. Not only is this film my second favorite Alien film in the franchise, but in my opinion, the greatest horror achievement of all time. The sci-fi horror imagery of this film was phenomenal, and it still has one of the best looking sci-fi ships and architecture I've ever seen in any film. There's really nothing glossy or pure about it, because it actually looks a bit dirty, used, and lived in, which adds to its realism. The claustrophobic atmosphere created by Ridley Scott and the way the shots are composited gave the audience this horrifying thought that they are trapped inside this haunted ship with this monstrous alien that could come at them at any point. I loved the Spielberg Jaws approach by Ridley Scott in deciding not to show the xenomorph too often and only give the audience a few seconds of glances, because it truly adds to the scary feeling that you're trapped inside with it. The first hour spent at developing the main characters was great in making them all seem relatable and fun human beings to be around with, and we never even get to know that Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver, is the main protagonist of the film until over halfway through. Seeing Ripley develop from being the stick in the mud of the crew to being the strong lone survivor was a great journey. Overall, Ridley Scott's 1979 horror masterpiece is my favorite horror film of all time, and I hope that all future horror films take inspiration from this gem of a film. Welp, that does it for my list of my favorite horror films of all time. Tell me what yours are in the comments below, and I will see you all next time. Peace.